2025 was one of those years where I really struggled with making my top 10 list. Now, that doesn't mean it was difficult for me to find 10 games to put on it. That has happened occasionally in previous years, but this year that part was so incredibly easy. I had at least 25 games in consideration for my top 10 at some point or another throughout the year as I revised it. But the struggle was figuring out which of those games made it into the final list, and then what order to put those 10 games into. There were so many great games with a ton that just barely didn't make their way onto the list. But I finally managed to limit myself to just 10 and put them in order. So it's time, once again, to take a look at my personal top 10 games list for 2025. Eclipsium, for the vast majority of the time I spent playing it, was a game that I was just enjoying for what it was on the surface. It excelled at being surreal, and while a bit plodding occasionally, it had plenty of interesting things going on that kept me engaged, from its moment-to-moment, ever-evolving mechanics to its truly incredible visual style that really struggles mightily to come across in compressed video or screenshots. But then, as I got into the latter part of the game, things got way more interesting extremely quickly, and Eclipsium became home to some of the most inventive and visually arresting scenes and mechanics that I've seen all year. I don't want to spoil all that much, so I won't go into too much detail, but within its final hours, Eclipsium took my breath away more than once. Barring any overly specific anecdotes around some of the incredibly enjoyable mechanics or puzzles, perhaps the best way I can think of to summarize the experience is that this is a fantastic game that, even within its own mechanical boundaries, leaves almost everything up to interpretation, but still leaves you wanting so much more, no matter what you take away from it. Angeline Era's gameplay hooked me almost immediately. And while the first thing that struck me about the game was just how much fun I was having with its very specific evolution of what it calls bump/combat, a style that is very reminiscent of the old Ys games, as I played on, what kept hitting me over and over again was just how inventive the game was in just about every new location. As I hunted through the game's world, working to find new mini-dungeons to explore, the vast majority of them gave me some new twist on the combat formula, something new and exciting to mess around with. And the game also just feels so authentically of the era that it's trying to replicate. To me, it wasn't like I was playing a modern game made to evoke that era. I was playing a game that easily could have come out back then, from the way the game feels, to the way it looks, to its really heavy story focus on philosophy and religious ideas. Even the music, while absolutely incredible, was clearly made with era-appropriate limitations in mind. As a consequence, however, the handful of small modern touches, like the character portraits, feel like they're from some modern remaster, though admittedly in a loving way, not a tacked-on way. Angeline Era is ultimately a game that wants you to explore not only its world, but every bit of its mechanics and gameplay as well. The game fully trusts you in a way you so rarely see these days, and builds a really fun and challenging game inside of that wrapper of trust. Hades 2 is a sequel that, for the most part, plays it pretty safe. And when you're starting with a game that was as great as the first Hades, that's more than enough. It keeps the same great core gameplay with a few key combat tweaks along the way, while also managing to add in a ton of really great new features that keep things fresh. The most important of these, as far as I'm concerned, is the game's new dual run structure. A bit of a mechanical spoiler here, but once you progress far enough in the game's default downstairs run, an upstairs run also opens up. You'll likely focus on one or the other for long stretches of time in order to complete various objectives, but especially once you get into the post-game, having some level of variety to mix things up is incredibly welcome, and it opens up a ton of possibilities even when it's introduced initially partway through the game. Another thing I loved about the original game was its world and its characters. And while the overall plot of Hades 2 stumbles a little bit, especially with the ending, and especially when compared with its direct predecessor and some of Supergiant's other fantastic story-driven games, the studio's character-specific writing remains a massive highlight in Hades 2, and I have tons of new favorite characters in this game, just like I had in its predecessor. Regardless of anything else, though, the moment-to-moment experience of playing Hades 2 is both incredibly solid and amazingly fun. Death Stranding 2, for me personally, felt redemptive in just about every way imaginable. I always felt as though the first Death Stranding passed me by in a way I really wished that it hadn't. In the past, I had been a fan of most of Kojima's output for one reason or another, but the first Death Stranding simply did not manage to grab me, despite how much I really tried to let it. There was something that kept turning me off. This entry, though, it grabbed me almost immediately and didn't let go until I had finally wrapped everything up, and I do mean everything. For starters, when it comes to its plot, I frankly think it works dramatically better and is so much easier to follow than its predecessor, and may in fact be Kojima's best, or at least most coherent story to date. Characters have clear motivations, the overarching plot has a clear through line, but at the same time, Kojima still leaves himself plenty of room to get incredibly weird with things. So you end up with the best of both worlds, having a really solidly built plot and having that trademark Kojima oddity. But the real reason that I loved Death Stranding 2 so much was the same reason I wanted to get into the first game so badly: the asymmetrical multiplayer mechanics. Using other people's stuff, leaving stuff of my own when I felt like I needed it personally, and the boost that I would get when anyone would use the stuff I had left behind, all make this a fantastic experience that hasn't been replicated since the first game, and I am so glad that its sequel grabbed me so much more immediately and thoroughly than that one did. Donkey Kong Bonanza plucks all the best parts from Nintendo's recent platformers and blends them together into one that outshines them all. A truly incredibly and thoroughly modern example of a 3D platformer that I hope we see a lot more of from Nintendo. Sure, it may not be particularly challenging for most of the game's runtime, but if we were measuring games in amount of fun per minute, Bonanza would be at the top of my list this year by a country mile. This game is pure and unadulterated joy almost constantly, in a way that no other game I played this year was. Scouring my way through layers, finding bananas and all sorts of other junk scattered around in every single nook and cranny imaginable was maybe the most purely joyful, fun mechanic I've encountered in recent years. And speaking to the lack of a challenging experience, like a lot of recent Nintendo games, there's a ton more depth hiding behind the first credit roll. I really enjoyed those extra post-game challenges, which serve as neat little puzzles on figuring out new ways to use your Bonanza powers that you probably didn't think about during the main game. Quite frankly, I had a ton of fun the whole time I spent playing Bonanza, but if the excellent post-game had not been there, this game would have been quite a bit lower on this list, as those sections managed to bring the game to a whole other level for me. Blueprints is the game that completely came out of nowhere for me this year and rapidly catapulted its way up the ranks of my list. A fascinating blend of puzzle solving, deduction, and roguelite. The layers of revelation are what really makes this game what it is. Figuring out how to reach my defined goal, then finding out what that actually really means, and expanding out from that was one of the greatest moments I had playing any game all year. But that's also not the only sort of revelation that this game has. You'll learn more about the world, the people in it, yourself, and more as you make your way through the game's rooms. This means that despite the game's roguelite structure, you're discovering new things on more runs than you're not, and it's often worth taking a new room over making direct progress in order to find out new information. That dynamic helps craft a truly excellent core of roguelite gameplay around building out a mansion over and over again from a semi-randomized deck of rooms that you draw from every time. Admittedly, I did not have anywhere near as many issues with some of the more random elements as some other players did. I managed to find my way to the ending with minimum interference from the game's dice rolls, and then I proceeded beyond it for quite a while longer, really plumbing the depths of the secrets the game held before finally putting the game down. And I have no doubt I've still left something on the table that I'd love to go back to. Hollow Knight's Silksong had an incredible amount of hype leading up to it. Massive numbers of people have been waiting a long time for this one, and for good reason. The first game was a fantastic Metroidvania that also managed to seamlessly integrate ideas from the Souls-like genre inside a very well-realized world that's a joy to immerse yourself in. Silksong, originally planned as an expansion that became so much more, delivers on all the same things its predecessor did and more. The main character this time, Hornet, was already known to players having been in the first game, and more importantly, actually has a fully fleshed out character with her own dialogue, making her interactions with the characters in the world a whole lot more fun than they were in the first game. As with a lot of these sorts of games, there's certainly a lengthy discussion worth having about difficulty options and the like, but outside certain boss runbacks and a few other incredibly frustrating moments and sections, I've found meeting the challenge of Silksong incredibly satisfying. Just like a Souls game or any one of a series of really difficult games, the feeling that you get when you finally kill a particularly meddlesome boss is worth everything you've dealt with up until that point. So despite whatever small hangups I had around the edges, ultimately the way this entire package comes together as a whole is absolutely undeniable. The art, music, gameplay, and world design all work together in a way that is truly unmatched in the genre. Silksong stands tall as one of the genre's best, while also strongly distinguishing itself both from its predecessor and so many other games in the genre in a way that gives it an identity all its own. The Seance of Blake Manor does an incredible job of building a fully explorable location in a way other deduction games in this recent wave haven't been interested in doing. This one perfectly melds your more traditional sort of adventure game, albeit without the usual annoyingly arbitrary puzzles, with the sorts of deduction games we've seen recently like Return of the Obra Dinn. This means that I got to know the manor incredibly well as I played through the game. I went from having to almost constantly stare at a map to basically being able to figure out how to get where I needed to go almost instantly. The time-spending mechanic, which combines a full cycle of days and nights with a mechanic that has every single action you take using up some preset amount of time, usually a minute for most actions, seems to have proved divisive, but I kind of loved it. It forces you to actually make conscious decisions about what's worth looking at. Like, hey, do I really need to look at every single item in a room when that takes time I could have spent doing something else? Probably not. Doing something else is likely more valuable, and I can just look at the items without actually interacting with them to get a line of dialogue about them, saving the interactions for things that I specifically think seem suspicious or valuable. Still, the game gives you plenty of time to get the best ending while still allowing you to luxuriate in its characters and world. Something that is greatly appreciated because there is a lot of detail that has been crammed in here. And while the tale has a distinctly supernatural tinge to it, it makes real efforts to depict a time and place in Ireland specifically. Hell, you can go to in-game lectures where you learn even more about it than what you get out of conversations with other characters. And those characters are also really fantastically written. I feel like I got to know every single one of them in a way that so few games allow me to, especially games in the sort of adventure or deduction section of the landscape. The Seance of Blake Manor shows a magnificent way forward for several different types of games by seamlessly blending adventure games with deduction games with even a tiny bit of The Last Express specifically thrown in for good measure. This game is well worth playing for anyone who enjoys a good mystery, a good adventure, or just a good story. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 makes a real attempt to build a living, breathing world that is incredibly evocative of other wildly ambitious games like Oblivion. It doesn't always succeed, and it has some really annoying choices in terms of its combat mechanics and how its save system requires a brewed potion in order to quick save wherever you want, but the world that's been built here really shines through all that. And oh boy, speaking of the world, if you're like me and you really enjoy reading codex entries, this game has them in spades. And you might learn a thing or two about the time period in which this game takes place in the process as you try and figure out just how this world works. Now, the game absolutely does have a bunch of the traditional structures you'd expect in an open world RPG, with all sorts of side quests to stumble your way into, tons of ways to tackle each and every one of those quests, loads of dialogue choices to make, and so many ways to accidentally die. But where this game really struck me, and the reason it's so high up on this list, is that as you play, you realize that even its most annoying gameplay systems are obtuse for a damn good reason. Just about everything in the game has a real tactility to it, in a way that a lot of its closest peers simply lack. In most other games, when you're crafting something, you just pick the ingredients that match a recipe, click the craft button, and then a new sword or a potion or whatever pops into your inventory. But here, in KCD2, you have to make a real effort to purposefully craft something, whether that's with its intricate alchemy system that requires following an actual recipe with detailed and sometimes complicated steps, or hammering out metal into the shape of a sword you're looking to create. And all that stuff can certainly feel annoying and obtuse at times, but that level of interaction also serves as a form of immersive roleplay, and it encourages other forms of it, as I found myself traversing the world and doing things that maybe the game won't reward me for in a concrete gameplay sense, but that I feel like my version of the main character would do in the moment. And when a game gets you doing those sorts of things, in my mind, that's when it's actually succeeded and actually become a true role-playing game. If you've been looking for a game to truly be the successor of Elder Scrolls, to be the successor to Oblivion specifically, a game willing to try new things and go new places with the formula, it's all right here in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is one of the most obvious number one picks I've ever had in all these years of top 10 lists, but put simply, it's for a really good reason. I was excited for Clair Obscur's potential prior to release based on the trailers that were getting put out, but when I finally got my hands on this game, it absolutely blew me out of the water. A truly great turn-based RPG that not only makes the most of the traditional boundaries of the genre as they exist, but moves things forward in a way we haven't seen in that genre for so many years. This game deserves all the praise it's getting, and probably even more, if that's even possible. As I was making my way through Clair Obscur, every time I would drop off to go play another game for a little while and come back, it would strike me all over again, almost immediately, how uniquely great Clair Obscur is in almost every single aspect that matters. The characters are phenomenally written, incredibly well realized, and they benefit greatly from existing inside a meticulously crafted world that feels truly alive. Its story, meanwhile, is a very touching journey that kept me enthralled throughout, and it ties in very well with the character-specific plot lines that are also being woven into the fabric of the game. The parry and dodge-centric combat, meanwhile, provides a template that will hopefully serve as a new way forward for turn-based RPGs. One that doesn't stick to the old ways entirely, but also doesn't take the extreme action approach modern Final Fantasy does, opting for the best version of an active turn-based system I've ever seen, where timed button presses help determine how successful or unsuccessful you're going to be. To simplify it almost certainly too much, this is the Super Mario RPG combat system ramped up to 11. The Picto system, meanwhile, allows for enormous amounts of build customization that gives you a ton of different ways to play, including completely breaking the game. I loved just about every minute of this game, and I also loved the ways it found to challenge me. I sought out and conquered every optional area and boss just to squeeze every little last bit of juice this game had in it, before I finally looped back around to actually finish the game properly. Following this game up is going to be hard, not only for the developers who made it, but for anyone who wants to make a new traditional turn-based RPG. Clair Obscur is simply the new benchmark, and I hope that more and more games rise to meet it.